Shalom, shalom, family. Concerning the current environment and everything that's going on, I just want to bring out an old incident or article that happened back in 2009 concerning a certain situation that's going on now, but with a different name. H1N1 was supposed to be touted as a pandemic back in 2009. This journalist went against WHO and UN for bioterrorism and intent to commit mass murder. This journalist, independent journalist, Jane Burgermeister, is the one that brought out the charges against the WHO and UN. As the anticipated July release date for Baxter's H1N1 flu pandemic vaccine approaches, an Austrian investigative journalist is warning the world that the greatest crime in the history of humanity is underway. Jane Burgermeister has recently filed criminal charges with the FBI against the World Health Organization, the UN, and several of the highest ranking government and corporate officials concerning bioterrorism and attempts to commit mass murder. She has also prepared an injunction against forced vaccination, which is being filed in America. These actions follow her charges filed in April 2009 against Baxter AG and Avir Green Hills Biotechnology of Austria for producing contaminated bird flu vaccine, alleging this was a deliberate act to cause and profit from a pandemic. Some of the claims and allegations filed with the FBI in Austria happened in June 10th, 2009. Burgermeister presents evidence of acts of bioterrorism that is in violation of U.S. law by a group operating with the U.S. under the direction of international bankers who control the Federal Reserve as well as the WHO, UN, and NATO. This bioterrorism is for the purpose of carrying out a mass genocide against the U.S. population by use of genetically engineered flu pandemic virus with the intent of causing death. This group has annexed high government offices in the U.S. Specific evidence is presented that the defendants at this time, this is when Obama was in office, Barack Obama, Dave Nabarro, UN Systems Coordinator for Influenza, Margaret Chan, Director General of WHO, Kathleen Sibilis, Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Janet Napolitano, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, David D. Rothschild, David Rockefeller, George Soros, Werner Faymann, Chancellor of Austria, and Alois Stoger, Austrian Health Minister, amongst others, are part of this international corporate criminal syndicate which has developed, produced, stockpiled, and employed biological weapons to eliminate the population of the U.S. and other countries for financial and political gains. I'm going to end here, but you see, that's the same thing that's going on, or similar to what's going on now. I'll link the article, and I have a follow-up video with this Jane Burgermeister, so you can do your own research. Shalom.
Daniela Dahl, a 19-year-old Swede, is just one of thousands of young people who has had her life destroyed by the swine flu vaccine in 2009. The vaccine gave her narcolepsy, a brain disorder associated with uncontrollable sleep attacks, hallucinations, and catalepsy. I trusted them, she said. I trusted them. One injection and my whole life changed. 50,000 people in Germany now have narcolepsy, according to a report in Die Welt from January of this year. Every sixth sufferer is a child. The average age is between 15 and 25 years old. The governments of Norway, Sweden, Finland and Ireland have confirmed that the many cases of narcolepsy are due to the pandemic vaccine. There are many more cases expected to appear soon. The horrifying thing is that nothing much has changed. We, the people of the world, still face the same monolithic threat from a mass vaccination campaign with the pandemic vaccine today as we did in 2009. The same pandemic vaccine is still being recommended by the World Health Organization. If anything, a review of the pandemic by the World Health Organization in 2011 has resulted in an even greater threat to the global population. It allows for even more pandemic vaccines to be delivered even faster to the people of the world. The biggest change in 2011 is the privatization of the pandemic virus warning system. Here we have a clear conflict of interest. Big Pharma, which stands to make the most profit from declaring a pandemic emergency, now has control over the World Health Organization's pandemic warning system. Pharmaceutical companies like GlaxoSmithKline have become key stakeholders in a network of WHO laboratories scattered around the globe, which is supposed to track the progress of a pandemic virus. The secret influence of big pharma companies on the World Health Organization vaccine policy in 2009 has since been exposed. WHO even changed the definition of a pandemic to be able to declare a pandemic emergency level 6 and trigger multi-billion-dollar contracts for big pharma. Baxter nearly started a global pandemic in 2009 when staff contaminated 72 kilos of the seasonal flu vaccine material with the deadly bird flu virus at its biosecurity level 3 facilities in Austria. Baxter had also pre-negotiated contracts to sell the pandemic vaccine. It has since emerged that Baxter is a site which is critical to US security, according to leaked diplomatic cables published by WikiLeaks. The question is, who runs this biosecurity facility? Is it the CIA? Is it a secret bioweapons lab? How could an incident of the kind that occurred in 2009 happen at Baxter's facility? It gets worse. The same pandemic vaccine is not only being recommended by the World Health Organization, WHO has announced plans to stockpile 150 million doses of pandemic vaccine. The purpose is to deliver the toxic vaccine even faster to the population of the globe. Pharmaceutical companies have also announced plans to transfer vaccine and adjuvant manufacturing technology around the globe to make sure everyone can be given these jabs more quickly. In 2009, plans to vaccinate 6 billion people around the world were activated by WHO. Yes, 6 billion people. Remember all the hype about a virus which could kill 95% of the population? Remember all the reports about crematoriums and mass graves? Imagine if the pandemic vaccine campaign had succeeded. There would now be millions of people around the globe, overwhelmingly young people like Daniela Dahl, suffering from narcolepsy and other autoimmune diseases. In 2009, France came closest to declaring martial law over the pandemic. Hundreds of vaccine facilities were set up around the country. Many of them were specially secure facilities with windows with iron bars, for example. Police actually marched into hospitals and forced doctors and nurses to go to these centers to administer the swine flu pandemic vaccine. In the end, only 6% of the French population took the swine flu pandemic vaccination because of the information available on the alternative media. The vaccination campaign in France was abruptly stopped when a group of activists filed charges of mass poisoning in a civil court in Paris against the French health minister Roselyne Bachelot at the end of 2009. Her lawyers couldn't find any answer to the evidence. After the first day of the court case in Paris, Roselyne Bachelot appeared on French TV and announced the end of the vaccination campaign, which was originally designed to vaccinate 100% of the French population by the end of January of 2010. This mass vaccination campaign was triggered in spite of the fact that the swine flu virus was so mild. Only 29 people, according to official figures, died of the swine flu in 2009. 3,000 people usually die from a seasonal normal flu every year. In spite of all the hype from governments, big pharma and the mainstream media, only 1% of the people in Italy and Spain took the pandemic vaccine, 3% in Austria, 3% in Israel, about 6% in Germany and France, and 5% in Sweden, or about 500,000 Swedish people. In Poland, no one took the vaccine because the health minister Eva Kopacz, a doctor, decided that it wasn't safe enough. As a doctor, my guiding principle has to be not to damage others, Kopacz told the Polish parliament in 2009. We will not buy the vaccine against the swine flu. The Polish health minister was alone in refusing to trigger the pandemic vaccine contract with Big Pharma, apart from Russia, a country which also doesn't have chemtrails. And the Polish government paid a terrible price. Just days after Eva Kopacz gave evidence about the pandemic vaccine at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, PACE, 96 top Polish government and military officials were killed in a mysterious plane crash in Smolensk, itself now the subject of an inquiry, after an enormous amount of evidence showed that this was not an accident, but an assassination attempt. The head of the PACE inquiry, UK MP Paul Flynn, dropped all mention of the scientific evidence that the swine flu vaccine adjuvant was damaging, the very reason that Kopacz, a doctor, had refused it. In his final report, published just a few weeks later, in June 2010, Eva Kopacz has been pretty much silent about the vaccine ever since. The PACE inquiry was a fraud and persuaded people that something had happened when nothing fundamentally had changed, and we face the same monolithic danger of a mass vaccination campaign with the same toxic vaccine as in 2009. Paul Flynn and PACE did not examine the evidence that the pandemic vaccine is dangerous. He excluded the issue of the political and military factors involved in a pandemic level 6 emergency declaration. He did not examine the issue that we can be given this pandemic vaccine by force, and there are provisions for forced quarantine. The PACE inquiry lulled people into thinking that effective action had been taken when no effective action has been taken. No one has been brought to justice, not James Murdoch, the son of Rupert Murdoch, who sat on the board of GlaxoSmithKline between January 2009 and January 2012. The Murdoch media empire promoted the pandemic virus hype. Justice has not been brought to Andrew Whitty, the chief executive of GlaxoSmithKline, the pandemics manufacturer of pandemics. Andrew Whitty was even awarded a knighthood by Prince Charles in May of this year. The managers who nearly started a global bird flu pandemic in Baxter in 2009 have also not been brought to justice. Alex Jones and InfoWars played a key role in promoting the PACE pandemic false investigation. From the very beginning, Alex Jones promoted the virus hype. It was only when information about the vaccines began to circulate on the internet that Alex Jones followed the wave to retain credibility. From the beginning, he excluded all the main critics of the pandemic vaccine, like Dr. Rebecca Carley and myself, from his show. Alex Jones even lied to his listeners about the reason why I did not appear on his show. The truth is, I was invited by his staff, but when the time came for me to take the call, there was no call from InfoWars. German lawmaker Wolfgang Wodak appeared out of nowhere on the Alex Jones show when the vaccine campaign was over and when it was clear that it had failed. Alex Jones helped promote Wolfgang Wodak and the PACE inquiry as the spearhead of the criticism against the mass pandemic vaccination program. What has happened to me since 2009 is a salutary warning about how little real free speech we have in Western Europe. In 2010, 3 attempts were made to psychiatrize me by elements in the Austrian government and also elements in the global elite. A government-paid researcher at the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute called Lucas Kenner, funded by Baxter, tried to have me confined twice at the start of 2010. He is also a doctor and a pathologist at Vienna's main hospital, and he has published about his cancer research in a Rockefeller journal. He had never met me, but he went to a psychiatrist who also works on a government bioethics committee and asked her to have me confined. An Austrian police inspector has filed charges against the psychiatrist, but the court case has still not started. The board of the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute reads like a who's who of the Austrian elite. Bankers, industrialists, media tsars, and politicians of all parties sit on it. There is Christian Konrad, the head of Raiffeisen Bank, Dr. Ferdinand Mayer from Raiffeisen Bank, Franz Löschnack, the former Social Democrat health minister, Christian Rehner, the editor of magazine Profil, and Markus Bayer of the Austrian State Holding Company. Bayer is now going to take over position in Brussels. A 3rd attempt was made to psychiatrize me by putting me under court guardianship, but that attempt also failed because I could prove the judge had lied and the publicity was too great. I am an experienced medical journalist who has written for the Nature, the Medical Journal, the Scientist, and many other publications. I presented facts and documents about the pandemic and the pandemic vaccine. What I said has proved to be accurate. That is why the globalist elite wanted to eliminate me. The stage is now set for another event to trigger a pandemic. This time, an act of bioterrorism could be used. Albert Osterhaus, a key advisor to the World Health Organization, claims to have found an especially deadly variant of the bird flu virus. This was published in Nature just a couple of weeks ago. Osterhaus also had shares in a firm producing the swine flu pandemic vaccine in 2009. The Olympics in London, for example, would be a perfect opportunity to spread some toxins and spark yet another fake pandemic and push for global mass vaccination campaign. This time, WHO laboratories controlled by Big Pharma would hype the virus even more than they did in 2009. There are more and more signs that the global elite are planning a pandemic scare soon. In May, the government of Burkina Faso in Africa ended a major pandemic emergency exercise based on a scenario where a virus like influenza appears in a remote village.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree, unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
Based on a scenario where a virus like influenza appears in a remote village. In spite of all the huff and puff, we face the same danger today that we faced in 2009. The same toxic pandemic vaccines can be given to us in the event of a pandemic emergency level 6. Big pharma companies have got greater control over the WHO's pandemic early virus warning system, allowing them greater opportunities for virus pandemic hype. Thanks very much for waiting to listen to this. I did do English at Edinburgh University, a useless subject, but I ended up working in a medical journal in Austria, and that's how I came to be familiar with the medical world. And then I was writing for the British Medical Journal and Reuters and various other publications like The Scientist. And that's why when I heard in February of this year that 72 kilos of vaccine material had been contaminated with the live bird flu virus by Baxter in Austria, I knew there was a big problem and I started filing criminal charges. But what I'd like to talk about this evening is how the media is working together with the pharmaceutical companies to conceal from people what's really going on. And I just want to say that thanks to the independent media, we're able to do what previous generations could never have hoped to do. We can research facts, treaties and documents related to government actions and events for ourselves. And we can see today more clearly than at any time before in history the discrepancy between what is contained in those documents, treaties and regulations, and what the mainstream media and the governments is telling us is contained in these documents. For the first time, we can comprehend the scale and the nature of the monstrous and ruthless conspiracy that John F. Kennedy was talking about.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
In 1961, before he was assassinated. Now, in 1961, this New World Order conspiracy was a vague notion, much like the contours of an island seen far off on the horizon remain indistinct and unclear. Today, in 2009, thanks to the information we can obtain through the independent media and by our own original research, we have reached the shores, so to speak, of that island, and we can see very clearly every single feature, every single cliff and beach and palm tree. We can really understand now how our political and economic systems are working and who is running them, and this awareness is growing very rapidly.
Hopefully this didn't come off as a conspiracy type of video. But if we take into account what Jane Burgermeister encountered in 2009 and compare with what's happening today with different players, different administration, with Bill Gates, Fauci, and the so-called virus task force, but still involves WHO and the UN, the obvious can't be denied that we are being played. As of this video upload, April 12th, 2020, they have already started to take hold of the food supply, forcing dairy farmers and beef suppliers to kill or sell off their cows, along with vegetable farmers doing the same because they can't get the stock they have to the stores. So it's just a matter of time before we start seeing shortages, with toilet paper being the less of your worries. Take care, family. Be safe. And don't take the shot. Yahweh God.